Hey everybody, sorry for the late start. That looks different. Hang on a second. All right, I think that's right. Everybody hear me okay? Boy, that view of my top of my head is not what I was going for. Give me a sound check. Everybody, yeah, I think it should be fine. This should not. No, I don't know. I don't know, but that should be okay. Should be normal. Whatever normal is. Thanks, everyone. Yes, of course, Misty enjoyed the weather today. She'd like it to be 197. It was too hot. That's what today was. Today was too hot. Misty, good evening. Ben, good to see you. Luana, good to have you. Nice to see you again. Of course, I'm seeing Misty again as well. Janice, whom I'm also seeing again. Cheryl, whom I'm also seeing again. It's just everybody I'm seeing again. Jeff and Jill, I did not see you today. Nice to see you. Low in the 40s tomorrow. What's the high? 100? Sue, good to see you. Sue, is it your birthday yesterday? Susan, glad you're with us. Need to get that girl of yours on here. High of 76. That I can live with. A couple people over on YouTube. Glad to have you. Got some weird stuff for you today. Sunday, yeah. See, Sunday feels like yesterday to me for some reason, but I recognize that it's not. I've lost my watch. Oh, I took it off. It's downstairs. Good, she'll be here. But you can see it. My loving wife was letting me know, as wives are supposed to do, that the tag was sticking up on my shirt. Her tag is also sticking up, but you're not as likely, you're not going to see hers any more than you would see mine. So we are a tag sticking up kind of family. Show you guys the new hairstyle I'm going to grow. Had a friend work this up for me based on my actual picture. There it is. What do you guys think? That's my actual picture. It's just this picture, which is actually just this picture. So there's me. And then my buddy put it on a better background and gave me the mustache that he thinks I should have. And then he decided that I needed sunglasses, which I've got a pair of sunglasses just like this, and he decided I needed some hair. So I talked to Jennifer, and she thinks I can grow this out in about a year. So that's where I'm headed. Hope y'all like that. Melissa likes it. Good to see you, Melissa. Thank you, Janice. Dorothy Collier, still not receiving notifications. Let's just pop in here and take a look. It is possible that for some reason your carrier has decided that we are junk mail and it's just not gonna work. Let's specifically look at this broadcast. It says 100% were delivered. Let's look at delivered. And let's look and see Dorothy Collier. It says delivered. So Dorothy, I'm going to private message you the number that it says it was delivered to. There, I just sent you a message. Let me know if that's the right number. But I mean, I believe you, of course, but it is telling me that you got that message. Like your carrier is sent our service a message saying that that message was received and delivered to you. That's weird. You just got to complain about it and then you'll get it. Yeah, that, you know, Cheryl and I get a lot of delays on our stuff. You can't ever leave us a voicemail or it'll be a long time. Oh my gosh, it's 7:15. We got to get going. I got started late. All right. Susan, good to see you. Melissa, as I said, it's great to see you. Dorothy, I'm glad you're with us. YouTube folks, thanks for being here. Let's get going. We've got something strange in the neighborhood tonight. We had a story about Joseph. It started, we started talking about Joseph, and we're going to start talking about Joseph again in chapter 39 and in chapter 40 and in chapter 41 and in chapter 42. And in chapter 43, we're going to talk about Joseph. And in chapter 44, we're going to talk about Joseph. And in chapter 44, we're going to go back to Judah. And Judah's really important. And I'll mention why in a moment. But Joseph is also very, very important. And we'll get to that as well. And then finally, in chapter 46, Jacob's going to bring his entire family to Egypt, which is not a good place for the Israelites to be. Then there's going to be a famine in Egypt, and then Jacob is going to die, and he's going to bless all of his sons. We're going to have some poetry as he does that, and then Jacob is going to die. Joseph is going to forgive all of his brothers for selling him into slavery, and then Joseph is going to die, and then, guess what? We're going to be done with Genesis. We are that close. So it really is the story of Joseph for the rest of the time that we are in the book of Genesis. And we started that last week. And yet today, out of nowhere, we have this story about Judah, this strange story about Judah. And so that the question we might ask ourselves is, why? Why is there a story about Judah and Tamar in here? Well, literally speaking, there are a couple of reasons. One is to sort of slow down the story. We're getting to the juicy part. Like I said, the story of Joseph is critical in the book of Genesis. And so this serves to kind of slow that down a little bit. But for reasons that will make themselves very obvious in later books of the Bible, such as the book of Ruth and the book of Matthew, that I'm going to spoil for you at the end of our discussion today. This story of Judah and Tamar is a critical story in our story, but it is a weird story that I struggled to find sort of a universal teaching and a universal meaning that you can walk away from and say, oh, that's what tonight's lesson was about. But I'll give it a try. And also, we kind of have to hurry because I don't want to do this over 2 weeks. Genesis 38, verse 1. It happened at that time that Judah, so Judah's going to separate from his brothers, that Judah went down from his brothers and settled near a certain Adullamite whose name was Hirah. There, Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He married her and went into her. Man, Abraham's family just cannot stay away from the Canaanites, can they? Do you remember who the Canaanites were? Do y'all remember where they came from? They were descendants of one of the descendants of Noah. Of course, I guess for that matter, everybody is descendants of one of the descendants of Noah. But one of the direct descendants of Noah. And we know what he went into her means. If we didn't, the scripture will tell us immediately. She conceived and bore a son, and he named him Okay, so Judah has a son, and Judah's son is named Again, she conceived and bore a son, whom she named Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she named him Shelah. Okay? She was in Shezib when she bore him. Judah took a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. Now, that line is a little bit confusing because the Hebrew used here is correctly translated into English as took, which is the same verb meaning what we would say when we would say he took a wife, but it's also the same verb that means he took. For instance, when we spoke of the rape of Dinah, that word he took her. That's the same word, but here it simply meant he acquired. Keep in mind that at this time, women were, oh boy. They were trade fodder for families. They helped unite families together. They helped increase wealth for families. I mean, that's part of why the Dinah's brothers were upset. It wasn't just that their sister was defiled. It's that their sister was defiled and they didn't get anything for it. That's why the retribution for it wasn't just defiling the people who had defiled her, it was getting retribution for it. They wanted payment for their sister because that's what they should have gotten to begin with. Keep in mind, right? They're not great people. They're the ones who sold Joseph into slavery. Granted, a couple of them maybe had better intentions than the other. But we'll circle back to that as somebody in popular culture says quite often today. Anyway, so to keep this straight, Judah marries a woman and has 3 sons. Okay, we don't care about the daughters. I mean, we do, but the biblical narrative clearly does not. The 3 sons are Onan, and Shelah. Okay? And then the other name that's important is the wife that Judah secured for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. And now the scripture says, hey, Carol King Wansley, who is watching, good to see you. And now the scripture tells us something that I think we need to interpret using what we understand about I said this word 1,000 times, Deuteronistic theology. This idea that if you do good things happen to you. If you do bad things happen to you. If horrible things happen to you, it's because you're an evil person, right? And so the scripture says, but Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Now this is a really interesting line of scripture, because I don't remember, and maybe I'm wrong, but I can't recall another line of scripture up to this point that says that God has put someone to death. I mean, Cain literally murdered Abel. And God said that if anybody touched a hair on his head, that he would curse not just them, but their offspring for generations. But here it said that he was so wicked that God put him to death. Now, what I think happened is that he died of something unexplained. Maybe it was cancer. Maybe he got run over by a bull. Who knows what it was? And the theological interpretation of the time was that, well, if he died like that, he must have really ticked off God. And since God is the author of life and death, it must have been God that killed him. And if God killed him, he must have been evil. That's what I think. Whether I'm right or wrong in this particular instance doesn't matter, because it's not really relevant to the story. I just want to show you how you can apply your own personal theology, as long as it's sound theology, and I believe that my theology is sound theology, to the story and help you understand it. Because I think that makes more sense than just saying he was evil, so God killed him. I mean, you can go back to the flood and say that the world was so evil that God flooded the whole earth. And you can go back to Sodom and Gomorrah and say that they were so evil that God destroyed. But this is personal, right? This isn't just sort of an impersonal act of destroying a group of people, as weird as that sounds. It's much more personal to murder an individual, which is what this is claiming. And it continues, right? So now we're going to get a little bit. This is going to become law. And evidently it is, if it's not law, it's custom at the time, okay? So Judah says to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Raise up offspring for your brother. So eventually it becomes a law that when a woman becomes a widow, that the brother-in-law takes that woman as his wife and raises her children as his own, and then gives her more children. Okay, so it was the duty as the second born, who is now the oldest, to raise Tamar's children as his own. But evidently what's going on at the time is that she's already pregnant, and he's not interested in, he does not want he does not want to be a baby's daddy, I guess. Baby death? No baby death. Baby's live and mommy's live. Kim says she is now home from work and watching. Glad to have you. So, Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So scripture says he spilled his semen on the ground whenever he went into his brother's wife, so that he would not give offspring to his brother. So he did not want to fulfill the custom and impregnate his brother's widow, as was the custom and as would become the law. What he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord. And by the way, how does the narrator know that this is what happened? Did he tell people that he did this? Did Tamar tell people that he did this? Would she have known? I don't know. I don't want to think about it. I don't think we need to think about it. What the scripture said is what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, okay? So what he's being accused of is performing an act so as not to impregnate his brother's widow, his new wife. And for that act, God kills him. And again, I think you can apply my theory for Er's death. Although this is a little more specific, so perhaps not. And again, ultimately, it doesn't matter. But God kills him, according to the scripture. And so Judah has a duty now. As the father, he's lost his son and now he's lost his son Onan, and he's got one son left, Shelah, and now his job is to go to Shelah and say, hey, it is your job to become Tamar's husband, to take care of her, to lie with her, to give her children, so that our line might continue. But he is afraid of losing his son, Shelah. So he shirks that responsibility. And instead, he says to his daughter-in-law, Tamar, hey, just remain a widow in your father's house. Don't come around here. Just stay in your father's house, remain a widow until my son Shelah grows up. I mean, until he grows up, how old is he that he's expected to perform marital duties anyway? I don't know, for he feared that he too would die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live up in her father's house. All right, so what's the conflict at this point? The conflict is this. The first is that Judah has not done what he's supposed to do. He has not given his third son to Tamar, as is the custom. And the conflict for Tamar is that she's a widow, and widows are not taken care of. They're poor. There's no system to take care of them really at that point in time, and they're looked down upon, right? Because bad things happen to bad people, and if your first two husbands die, it's probably because you're a bad person, and so it reflects poorly upon you. And so because of Judah's selfish desire to not risk his third son's death, I've lost his name and I don't want to lose it, Shelah, because he's afraid to lose that death. He has in his own way defiled Tamar. So a, a little bit of mirroring of stories that we've seen before. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shaul's daughter, she never gets a name, died. And when Judah's time of mourning was over, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hirah the Adullamite. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she put off her widow's garments, put on a veil, wrapped herself up, sat down at the entrance to a name which is on the road to Timnah. When she saw that Shalom was grown up, yet she had not been given to him in marriage. Sorry, not when. She saw that Shelah was grown up, yet she had not been given to him in marriage. So she basically sheds she's got this like costume she's supposed to wear as a widow. And what she does is she sheds that costume, and instead she puts on a different costume that includes a veil. And what you might not know at this particular point in your life is that this is the costume of a prostitute. And so she notices that the son that was promised to her has not been given to her. Now, why has this happened? Because Judah's a bit of a coward, and he doesn't want to follow the custom because he's afraid that Shelah will die, because he thinks that Tamar is kind of like a poison fruit, right? That if his son is with her, that he too will die, and he doesn't want to risk his son. This parallels with the story of Ruth. In what way, Ben? I'm not seeing the parallels with the story of Ruth. Jimmy Bedford, good to see you. Let me know what you're thinking about that, Ben, and we'll talk about it. I mean, in the story of Ruth, her mother-in-law, Naomi, moves to a place because there's a drought in Bethlehem, and her husband dies, and then her sons die, and she's miserable, and she decides that she's going to go back to Bethlehem because the drought's over, and she knows that she's got family there and she can at least eat. And she's got 2 daughters-in-law, and one doesn't go with her, and one does go with her and refuses to leave her, and then goes back, and the one daughter-in-law falls in love with one of Ruth's kinsmen there. I'm not really the kinsman redeemer. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, okay, fair enough. I see some coincidence. I don't see any parallels, but that doesn't mean they're not there. I could just be missing them. Very, very, very different outcomes. So so she's mad, and she's kind of out. I would say she's out for revenge, but she is not out for revenge. That is the wrong way to look at this. She is out for justice. That is the correct way to approach what happens next. So when Judah sees her, and now his wife's been dead for long enough that he's comforted, and he's ready for some action, I believe is the scriptural term. And it says that when Judah saw her, he thought her to be a prostitute, because, you know, she covered her face as one does when you're a prostitute. Sorry, my chair has a mind of its own. Okay. So he went over to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come into you, as one does. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. When she said, what will you give me that you may come into me? He answered, I will send you a kid from my flock. Now this has a really kind of niche parallel. He's going to give her a goat in order to go into her. The brother who kills a goat and spreads the blood on the Technicolor Dreamcoat of his brother Joseph to trick his father into thinking that his son is dead. And perhaps this is meant to foreshadow, perhaps it's not, perhaps it's merely just another coincidence. Perhaps it's meant to foreshadow that he's about to be tricked. The goat throughout history is often used to indicate that a trick is coming. Let me look up something. I was just looking. In Norse mythology, Loki is associated with goats through various stories, and Loki is the trickster god. It's just kind of interesting. Okay. So whether that's coincidence or whether it's foreshadowing, it doesn't matter, because we're about to find out what happens. So he says he's gonna give her a goat from his flock, and maybe I've made a mistake here. Hang on just a second. Yep. Okay. It's a goat. I wanted to make sure it wasn't a sheep. It's a goat. Okay. So continuing on. So the problem is he doesn't have a goat with him. And so she says, only if you give me a pledge until you send it. And he said, what pledge shall I give you? And she replied, your signet and your cord and the staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her, and he went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she got up and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. So she kept the veil on the entire time, and he never knew who it was. This harkens back to when Jacob was very much in love with Rachel, and on his wedding night, Leah wore a veil, and he thought he was consummating his marriage with Rachel, but in the morning, Leah takes off the veil, and he sees that it's Leah and not Rachel. So again, we just have this mirroring story after mirroring story after mirroring story all throughout the book of Genesis, beginning with Adam and Eve, going all the way to the end of the book of Genesis. It's really amazing how it's just echoes of the same stories over and over. And in fact, throughout the entirety of the Bible and throughout the entirety of human history, it's just echoes. It's echoes of the same story. It's so amazing and wonderful and scary and sad and wonderful. It's amazing. So basically, what she was supposed to do was wait there, get the goat, which she could have sold for some money and bought some stuff, given him back the collateral that he had given her, right? The signet and the cord and the staff that all clearly identified who he was, but weren't worth anything, and gotten the goat, which was worth something, but she didn't want that. She wanted the things that would identify him instead. So she left. She took off the outfit that made her look like a prostitute, put back on the outfit that made her look like a widow. So Judah sent the goat, by his friend Adulamite to recover the pledge from the woman who couldn't find her. So he asked the townspeople, "Where's the temple prostitute who was by a name by the wayside?" But they said, "No prostitute's been here." So he returned to Judah and said, I can't find her. Moreover, the townspeople said, "No prostitute's been here." Judah replied, "Hey, let her keep the things as her own. Otherwise, we'll be laughed at. As you see, I sent this kid and you couldn't find her." He's happy. He got rid of some worthless stuff and he got to keep the goat. Good stuff. 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the whore." Moreover, and again, she's played the whore. That makes us think like people understand that she dressed as a prostitute. That's not what this is saying. This is saying she got pregnant out of wedlock. Okay, nobody knows what happened at this point. Your daughter-in-law got. She's a whore. Your daughter-in-law's a whore. She's pregnant as the result of being a whore. And Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." And as she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law. It was the owner. Oh, she's so smart. Women in the Bible are so smart. They're so cunning. They're so much smarter than the men. You ever notice that? Just like real life. It was the owner of these who made me pregnant, she said. And she said, "Take note, please, whose these are: the signet and the cord and the staff." Then Judah acknowledged them and said, "She is more right than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah." And Judah did not lie with her again. How about that? How about that? I've never watched Peyton Place, Luana. Maybe I should. Christine, good to see you. So he's willing to kill her because he's the patriarch, so he's the judge at the time. It's under his purview. His daughter-in-law is a whore, so he's just gonna burn her at the stake. And then notice she does not humiliate him. He doesn't let her get tied up to the stake and then she says it. She sends by private messenger. But he kind of openly says, "You know what? I was wrong. She was right. I said I would give her my son. I didn't do it. What she has done is less than I did." And so if there's a lesson, I don't know if this is right or not. This is something for you to meditate on and decide whether you think this is right or not. Let me find the quote. Uncle Ben in Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility. Only he didn't say it. Voltaire actually said it. But Jesus said, as recorded in Luke, to whom much is given, much will be required. And so I guess the opposite, or the converse of that would be, to little whom is given, less will be required. Think of the widow's mite. The widow has very little to give, and she gives very little, and the disciples mock her. And Jesus says, what are you talking about? She's given all that she has. Her offering is greater than the offering of those who have much and give very little, right? So basically, if you have a lot and you give very little, it means nothing. But if you have very little and you give a lot, and you give little, it means much more. So in this story, Judah has a lot. He has a son to give, and he doesn't give it. And so much was expected from him, and he doesn't give it. And not much was expected from Tamar. And so maybe sometimes for those who are marginalized, like the widow, who's had 2 husbands die, who's an outcast, who's not treated fairly, perhaps sometimes those who are marginalized have to work outside the customary system to receive the justice that they deserve. Maybe that's a lesson to be learned here. Don't, I'm a moderate in the way that I think politically and theologically and in most ways. So don't take that too far. Don't think that I'm taking that too far. Just think about that in the context of this story and see if that has any meaning for you. And let's continue the story. Because doggone it, we got a parallel here. We've got a mirror story that we need to take a look at. When the time of her delivery came, guess what? There were twins in her womb. I feel like we've heard this story before. But before there was something weird about the younger serving the older and a weird order coming out and all that kind of stuff. We're probably not going to have that. Let's read. While she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and bound on his hand a crimson thread, saying, this one came out first. But then he drew his hand back, and out came his brother. And she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. Therefore he was named Perez. So the first who came out was actually the second. Afterward, his brother, who was really the first, came out with the crimson thread on his hand, and he was named Zerah. Wouldn't it be weird if one day Jesus said something like the first will be last and the last will be first? That would be just absolutely wild. So in this particular case, even though the firstborn is Zerah, and the birthright should go to Zerah, and the family name and the promise should go to Zerah, we're going to find out later on that the birthright is actually going to go to this baby named Perez. And this is why Judah and Perez are so important. And this is why this will come up eventually in the story of Ruth and in the story of Matthew, because the story of Ruth and the story of Matthew both have genealogies. And the genealogies that they have are the genealogies of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And in both of those stories, they will tell us that Jesus Christ is the direct descendant of Judah and Perez, showing us once again that God chooses to make himself manifest, to become incarnate from a line of the most scandalous, bizarre scoundrels you could possibly imagine. Because in the history of humanity, there are no other kind of people. And if God can use those bizarre, scandalous scoundrels, God can use us. And that is the constant message echoed throughout the history of the Bible, from the story of Adam and Eve through the dream recorded in the book of the Revelation of John. And that is the very bizarre story of Judah and Tamar and their firstborn slash secondborn slash weirdly born child, Perez. So there you go. That is our story for today. It is 7:54. It is time for us to go. I hope that you enjoyed our story. We are going back to Joseph in Genesis 39. We've got 12 more chapters to get through the end of Genesis, but they will fly by pretty quickly. They are almost exclusively about Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Although the Dreamcoat's actually gone at this point. But when we are done with the book of Genesis, we will celebrate with a party at the church, and we will watch the 70s acclaimed hit Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat together. And then we will move into the book of Acts. And we'll see where that takes us, okay? So I hope that you enjoyed our lesson tonight. I'm glad that you were with us. Hope you have a good week. And I want to wish you the blessings of God. I wish you Godspeed. And as always, thanks for watching.